Hi there, folks. Saber4 here with a meta update following the Minnesota Regional. What we've got here today for you is we'll talk about the Minnesota Regional update. We will look a little bit at the combined regional and sector data. We'll talk about the PQs that happened this weekend that had the 32 plus participants. We'll dive in just a little bit to the overall current meta health. And then I have deck profiles for you from a couple of decks that are kind of big risers this weekend. That would be Han 1 green and Vader 4 yellow. Before we get going, if you have not already, please subscribe to the channel. It really helps out with growth a ton, and would love to have you being a part of the community, sort of interacting with things and kind of seeing where this goes. Anyway, let's go ahead and dive on in. A lot of data on this slide. Not going to try and read it all to you. Just going to point out a few things that are there, and we'll move on to a couple of the bigger points about the Minnesota Regional. There are 50 leaders in the chart on your left. That's who showed up. The biggest things of note are that Sabine is still the most played deck. There are 82 of those. Kira is second with 60. A huge riser this week is the Darth Vader from Jump to Lightspeed. 55 of those decks showed up, a variety of a lot of them, but mostly we're seeing Darth Vader Squadron Leader paired with yellow. We do see both versions of Han, Han 1 and Han 2. So each of these are kind of stacked. This is stacked as Han 2 followed by Han 1. Both of those a little bit less than the Darth Vader Squadron Leader, but combine for a pretty significant portion of the field. The remainder of what we have that are significant portions included Rey at 33 decks. The Spark of Rebellion Darth Vader came in with 32. Boba Fett came in with 31. Quinlan Voss came in with 27. Cad Bane 26. And so a couple of things to note here when we look at the chart on the right, which are the conversions. Not a single one of those Boba Fett's converted. Sorry, my mistake. Only one of those Boba Fett's converted. 30 did not. Anakin Skywalker converted 2 out of 32. Darth Vader, Dark Lord of the Sith, that's the one I was thinking of, converted none. And so we have a big gap between some of the second level of decks that came in and their conversion rates. What we did see was a slight drop-off in Sabine's conversion versus her overall appearance. Kira, slight uptick. Han Solo, slight uptick in both versions. Rey had a slight uptick, as did Darth Vader and Cad Bane. The hard numbers for that are on the next slide. The interesting couple of them here would be that Grand Moff Tarkin showed up with with 3 decks, converted 1, and then Admiral Akbar showed up as just 1 deck, and it converted. And so a couple of really interesting additions to what made day 2. Here's another kind of way to look at it. This pie chart gives you what were the percentages overall, and then I've given you just the conversion percentage of those top 6. Kira converted plus 3%. Sabine converted even. Han 2 converted plus 5.5. Han 1 converted plus 6. Rey converted at plus 6. Vader 4, even though because he was so heavily represented, only converted plus 1. But that's what made day 2 was 17 leaders out of 50, and a much tighter field than what we saw on the 26 decks or less in day 1. Now, of the stuff that showed up day 1, it is noteworthy to say that everything except for the 32 people playing Spark of Rebellion Darth Vader had at least 1 conversion. So we have kind of boiled down to what are the best decks, what's kind of out there, and what we're expecting to see. And that includes, with some variation, a lot more of the list that's on the right than what is on the left. Top eight. Top eight, a lot of familiar faces. Had a Kira Data Vault winner, had a Cad Bane Tarkentown, had a Han 1 Green, a Sabine ECL, two Quinlan Tarkentowns. And then the risers here, Ray Data Vault, which made an appearance, which is a, she has made a big surge in the last few weeks. Han 2 Blue, we've seen a lot of Han 2 showing up, but it's Han 2 Green that has mostly shown up. So a blue deck in here, although I like that deck very much, is the kind of newer face as far as Han 2 goes. A couple of near misses. The Jump to Lightspeed Thrawn Data Vault made it to 9th place. As a matter of fact, I think it bubbled out. I think it had if I remember correctly, I think it had the same record and just didn't make the top cut. And then Jump to Lightspeed Vader Yellow had several strong finishers inside the top 20, but did not make the top 8, finishing 14th, 15th, and 20th. Quinlan fell to 5% of the overall field, but even though he's 5% of the overall field, he's a quarter of 25% of the top 8. And so Quinlan still has a lot of legs as far as things go. It's just a little bit more risky into the wide field. People have adapted to that deck pretty well, and good players on Quinlan are still doing very, very well. And then, as we said, Admiral Akbar Grand Moff Tarkin also made the top 64, which is notable because I think that that's a first appearance for Admiral Akbar, or is a major appearance for Admiral Akbar, and then an appearance for Grand Moff Tarkin, which is a fun deck to play. And in a world where you play with commons and uncommons, Grand Moff Tarkin is a hard deck to beat. But big shout here to Ian, who collates this data for SWDB. I asked if he could pull together the combined regional and sector data, and he was able to get me this sheet pretty quickly. We want to look at this very briefly to understand a couple of things. Number one, where you have the highlighted colors and not gray is where you have more matches in. If I'm remembering it all correctly, anything that's a grayed box, there are less than 9 total games. Anything that are highlighted, the darker green is better, the darker red is worse. And then you have a string of 50% because these are the dead mirror matches. So this is Sabine ECL into Sabine ECL. Down here is Cad Tarkentown into Cad Tarkentown, which is always going to be one winner, one loser. A couple of things to note, and I'm going to clip back and forth between the next slide and this one just so that we can kind of see where those trends are. If you're watching this on a small screen, you might not see my mouse pointer move a lot very well, but I will kind of go back and forth between these to show you where a couple things happen. First off, as we said, Sabine ECL remains the most played. It is favored into several key matchups, most notably favored into Quinlan Tarkentown right here with about 57%, but does not do as well against Kira Data Vault or against Han 1 Green. Still is a little bit less than a 50% matchup into Cad Tarkentown, but does pretty well against the wide field. So she's got a fair matchup or a little better than fair into a lot of things that are out there. But she does have a couple of major struggle points into the big meta. And Han 1 Green is not, while not an auto loss, if you're talking about a 3-game set, if you are winning 34% of them, then you are losing 2 out of those 3. Anything beyond a 6 flip, she does really well into. Quinlan has continued to struggle with a big portion of the major meta, which is to say, continues to struggle with Han, Sabine, and Ray Data Vault. He's a strong play. He's the number 2 guy right here. Doesn't have blowouts anywhere. Loses to Sabine a little bit more than he wins, loses to Han a little bit more than he wins, but then does pretty well against everything that's kind of tier 2. And so he's a really strong play. And once you can kind of clear the chaff with him. But he doesn't have terribly strong play into a couple of the things that are likely to see day 2 and likely to see top 8. Kira continues to convert well in major meta, continues to do well. Kira is our third column here. You can see that even though Quinlan Tarkentown is just a shade under 50%, it's a 49.4. But she's green across the board with the exception of a very few things. And that's a thing that we have with Kira is that she's not, unless you're looking at like Gar Yellow out here where she's a 76%, and the Luke 1 data vault, where these are not a whole lot of games played, but have some big spikes. She's not just lighting it up and, the darkest, heaviest green that you get, but she's incredibly fair into most things. And so good players are able to convert this fairly regularly. And so that's why she's one of the strengths of the meta right now. Cad Tarkentown struggles into Quinlan, Kira, and Han, but is strong otherwise against the field. The Ray Data Vault performs well against the major meta. It got truncated over here, but if we come down right below this blue, we see here's Ray Data Vault, and here's Ray Data Vault with 50%, 51% or greater into Sabine, Quinlan, Kira, Han. So she does very well into some of the major meta, but has some struggles into things like CAD, into Vader 4 yellow. And those are like 20-25% into those. And so when she's against things that are not some of your kind of primary top 4, she can really struggle. Han 2 Data Vault, a little bit more spiked performance against the majors. So he's a little bit more back and forth when it comes to the major meta. Beats some of them fairly well and loses to some of them fairly routinely. So a little bit less of a predictable play pattern with Han 2. PQs. It's not a quiet week outside of Minnesota. We had a dozen PQs of 32 plus participants. Sabine didn't win one. Kira didn't win one. Han 1 green won 3 of them. One of those is Data Vault. The other 2 are regular green base. Darth Vader jumped to Lightspeed. The Darth Vader yellow won a couple of them. That's the reason that those 2 are going to be the deck profiles that we look at this week. Other winners included Bosk and Iden, Yoda and Boba, all on Data Vault, Anakin on Colossus, and then 2 of the smaller bases, the Poe ECL and a Cad Bane Tarkentown. And what that gives us is a current meta health with a very, very diverse set of leaders. There are 19 different leaders that have won PQs of greater than 32 players, sectionals or regionals thus far. Of that, there is a definitive top 5, and that is to say that there's some minor variants in here, but Kira on 9, Han 1 on 9 are just a shade ahead of Han 2 on 7, Ray on 7, Sabine on 7. And so those 5 are our top 5 in the meta right now. Outside of that, we have Palpatine, who has won 4, the Jump to Lightspeed Darth Vader, who is a real riser right now, has won 3. Anakin has won 3. Cad Bane has won 3. The other 10 have won 2 or less, have won 2 or more less. They're 2 or 1, but they've won some major tournaments. It is noteworthy to say that we favor the winners of the larger tournaments a little bit more than we favor the winners of the smaller tournaments. But that doesn't make them less impactful in the idea that there's a smaller group than the overall 70, 80 something leaders that have won. Only 19 have done it. Of that, there's a definitive top 5. Base utilization. If you're sitting down and looking across the field from you, especially in the top 8, a third of the time you're going to be seeing Data Vault. About 50% of the time you're going to be seeing green. So command is very strong right now. Yellow bases are only about 15% of the meta. So if you're seeing yellow, it's very likely that you're seeing it off of a yellow leader. Tarkentown remains almost as common as the yellow bases at 13.5%. All blue bases combined are less common than Tarkentown. And so it's quite likely that if you're seeing blue out of the leader. If you're seeing red, you're probably seeing red out of the leader. But we can look over here and tell you that the red ones are Sabine and Han too. And they are most likely to be playing something in green, which would say either Data Vault ECL. But that's where we are with the current meta health. Let's take a look at a couple of decks here. This is the list run by Alexander the Greatest. I had a very similar list without the second Falcon and without the stolen AT hauler. But I had a very similar list put together. I went ahead and adapted it to this one because this is what placed the best at the current peak or at the current regional. And so wanted to give you a chance to look at this. The strengths of this deck, a couple of things. Number one, one game line that you can have here is that you can put down an extra resource, toss down a Falcon as a turn one play. Your preference there is probably the piece of junk Falcon so that you can attack immediately. But that you can get that play line on the board and start attacking with a nice big ship early. If your hand supports it, or if you think that the game supports it, you can put down a stolen AT hauler and attack for 4 with the next turn. But that's another kind of that's a risk that's sometimes worth it. Tech is not a favored turn one play just because your real use for him is much later. Another very, very strong game line, and probably the one that I prefer if I'm sitting down and playing this deck, is the turn one resupply, because the turn one resupply means that I can natural play either Poe or Kira the next turn, or I can resource play and get Han Solo or Chewbacca the next turn if I wanted to. And while I don't necessarily want one of those pilots on the ground, the ability to hard cast them and put them out there and get them on the ground at their full value rather than at their pilot value is a big, big play, because what that means is that if I get them out there next turn, I can reasonably get myself that bigger play and talk about getting a 5, 6, and a 7, Han Solo being the 6, all on the board at once. If this deck is allowed to ramp and it gets to Enfys Nest essentially 2 resources early, you're going to have a real hard time getting around. Your opponents are going to have a real hard time getting around her. Not only is she a big body, but she's often insulated by the fact that Han Solo is on the board, and people will lose Han Solo to an indirect version of, Power of the Dark Side over losing Enfys Nest because she can continue to bounce things. She is most often one of your targets for that hotshot blaster because now she can push back to hand anything that's a 7 or less power. So a lot of things can happen once Enfys Nest is on the board. That said, she is not. Your deck isn't dependent on her. This Han Solo 6/6 ambusher, which has a shoot first play, is another wonderful thing to have on the board. U-wing reinforcement to put a lot of other small units out on the board is great. There's a lot that you can do with this, and a lot of varying ways that it can kind of mess with your opponents. It gets really, really difficult to get back off the floor if this deck plays a Millennium Falcon turn 1, attacks, pilots it with Chewbacca turn 2, and attacks again, and all of a sudden, 2 turns in, you've got a 6/7 that you can't really bounce and can't really remove. You have to attack into to get rid of it, and you've taken 9 damage, with 6 more probably coming. So this can be a very difficult deck to play against. It's fair in how it plays as far as once the units are on the table, but it's very difficult to play when it manages to get resources ahead, and that's just what Han does. Next up, This was Yoda Killer's deck. This was the highest placed Darth Vader yellow deck in the regional. I looked at a couple of them that played in the PQs and won. They're all pretty similar to this. They all use very similar tech, and that tech is this: a lot of one cost units. And these one cost units, there are 14 of in this deck. They allow you to put something on the table and then put something else on the table on turn one, making it where your opponent, unable to get rid of both of them at once, is not able to stop you from creating the TIE Fighter token. And once you are creating TIE Fighter tokens, while you haven't turned off anything like Power of the Dark Side, you have insulated yourself from it so that you can continue. It wants to continue attacking with its actual vehicle units, non-token vehicle units. And as long as it can do that, it can generate a TIE token. That TIE token can both insulate and it can attack for one. Or if we get Victor Leader on the board, can attack for two. The thing being that this doesn't have a lot of power behind its units. It's a death by 1,000 cuts. But the thing is that those cuts are going to become deeper and deeper every turn. Another thing that this deck can do very efficiently is that it can put down a couple of these one drops on turn one, followed by a Sanctioner Shuttle to pick up your opponent's turn one play and capture it, making it more difficult to do something like, even if you're kind of ramping through, making it more difficult to get to something like a barrage. A couple of things of note playing against this deck. I've played it several times. I've played against it with several decks. I'm just kind of trying to figure out its play lines and how I can play into it. Number one, this guy should never go on the ground. If your opponent plays Wingman Victor 2 to the ground, that's, especially if they do it turn one, it's because their deck made a horrible, horrible error. It's the most powerful unit that I could have played. It's the worst possible play. You had 14 other turn ones, and if you didn't draw one of these, or if you resourced them down, you're doing it wrong. Number two is that getting two of these online and then getting to something else in here at this 3 spot, especially if your main targets here are to save to put down the P-38 or the TIE Phantom, or really any of these, but the stolen AT hauler. I prefer to hold back Victor Leader until I'm a little closer to Vader. The stolen AT hauler, if you're playing against this deck, is bait, because you're going to have to do a lot to get to this 5. Now, you don't want to get hit by this 4 very often, and you definitely don't want it surprise striking you for 7. But when we're talking about playing it back is what I'm talking about here. They're going to have a lot of ways to run chaff into it to kill it, and to run a lot of things to get it back. A Sanctioner Shuttle can capture it from you. Captured units go to the player that owns them when they're done. And so, once the Sanctioner Shuttle is down, it comes back on their side. Waylay will bring it back to their hand. This thing is bait. Yes, it's something that you've got to kill. Leave it, discard it. Once it gets to discard pile, leave it there. Victor Leader is obviously a kill on sight, especially if the board gets big, as is the Clone Combat Squadron, because the more units this thing pumps out, the bigger that gets. The obvious target of something like Overwhelming Barrage would be to have the Clone Combat Squadron beefed up, especially if you're talking about any kind of time where they're able to save that until Vader's flip. He would put out 2 TIE tokens, be able to make that a very, very large unit, because it will be an 8/8 plus the number of units on the board in space, and then Overwhelming Barrage from it is incredibly devastating. But that's what this deck can do, and this is a look at the one that was played the best. A couple of things out of the sideboard here. Obviously, it has Bazine. Bazine is to be able to snipe out cards. We know very well what that does. Has an extra of No Good to Me Dead, and has a couple of things like your swoop down and your swoop down to be able to attack the ground units, and another kind of when played effect over here to be able to pick off units that are already damaged. Um, then confiscate to get rid of any upgrades. So that's what we have for our two kind of big risers. That's also what we have for our meta health right now and where we're sitting going into a PQ stretch before we get to the Galactic Championships in July. Hope you've enjoyed it. Hope you're subscribed, and we will see you next time.